The desert wind carried more than sand that morning. It carried the ghost of Captain Myra, Silence, Kastner, though nobody at Kandahar Air Base knew she was already dead. Her F-16 Fighting Falcon had vanished from radar 17 minutes ago, somewhere over the Hindu Kush Mountains, leaving behind only static and the kind of silence that makes veteran controllers reach for their coffee with trembling hands. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stared at the empty blip on his screen, his headset crackling with the desperate voices of search teams. Ghost Rider 7, this is Tower. Do you copy? Ghost Rider 7, respond. Nothing. The frequency remained as dead as the mountains themselves, and Rodriguez felt that familiar knot forming in his stomach, the same one that had plagued him since Fallujah, when silence meant body bags. 300 miles north. Major Catherine Viper Thorne adjusted her flight helmet and ran through her pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II sat heavy on the tarmac, its titanium bathtub cockpit gleaming under the Afghan sun. The other pilots called her the janitor behind her back, not because she cleaned up messes, but because they believed she only got the boring cleanup missions while the real warriors flew the glamorous sorties. "Viper, you're cleared for takeoff," came the voice through her headset. "Proceed to Grid Square 77 Alpha for routine reconnaissance. Intel suggests possible Taliban movement in the valley." Catherine's gloved fingers found the throttle, and the twin General Electric turbofans roared to life. The A-10 wasn't pretty. It looked like a flying tank, built around the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon that formed its spine. But Catherine had learned to love its honest brutality, its refusal to pretend to be anything other than what it was, a killer that brought soldiers home. As she lifted off, Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio again, this time directed at the search teams. "All units be advised. We have a missing F-16 pilot, call sign Silence. Last known position Grid Square 77 Alpha." Catherine's blood chilled. 77 Alpha. The same coordinates she was heading toward. The same mountains where Captain Kastner had earned her nickname 3 years ago during the Battle of Wanat, when her radio had gone silent for 6 hours while she single-handedly held off an entire Taliban squadron, emerging from the smoke like a ghost made of steel and vengeance. Now silence was truly silent, somewhere in those unforgiving peaks, and Catherine found herself flying toward either a rescue mission or a grave. The irony wasn't lost on her. The janitor was being sent to clean up after the legend. Below, the mountains stretched endlessly, their snow-capped peaks hiding secrets that the desert wind would never tell. Catherine pressed forward, unaware that she was about to discover why some legends are born in silence and why others die defending it. The radio crackled again. "Viper, maintain heading 270 and keep your eyes open. We don't know what took down Silence." Catherine's hands tightened on the controls. She had trained with Myra Kastner at Nellis Air Force Base, back when instructors still questioned whether women belonged in fighter cockpits. While Catherine had been quietly dismissed as competent but unremarkable, Myra had blazed through the program like a comet, earning the respect of every pilot who flew with her. Their paths had diverged after graduation, Myra to the glory of air-to-air combat, Catherine to the unglamorous but essential role of close air support. "Roger that, Tower. Viper en route to 77 Alpha, ETA 12 minutes." The A-10's engines hummed steadily as Catherine banked toward the mountains. Behind her, the sprawling base grew smaller, its runways and hangars becoming toy-like against the vast emptiness of the Afghan landscape. She had flown this route dozens of times, providing overwatch for ground patrols and convoy escorts. It was honest work, even if it lacked the glamour that her male colleagues craved. Catherine's radar screen remained clear, but she knew that meant nothing in these mountains. The terrain played tricks with electronic signals, creating blind spots where entire squadrons could hide. She adjusted her altitude, climbing to 8,000 feet to clear the highest peaks. The oxygen regulator hissed softly in her mask, a constant reminder of the thin air that surrounded her aluminum and steel cocoon. Tower, this is Viper. Beginning sweep of Sector 77 Alpha. No visual contact with Ghost Rider 7. Copy Viper. Expand your search pattern to include the eastern slopes. And remember, Silence was carrying classified payload. Catherine's eyebrows raised slightly. Classified payload. That changed everything. This wasn't just a search and rescue. It was a race against time to prevent sensitive technology from falling into enemy hands. The Taliban had been increasingly sophisticated in their tactics, and captured American avionics could provide them with a significant advantage. She banked left, her trained eyes scanning the rocky terrain below. The mountains looked peaceful from this altitude, their harsh beauty masking the violence that had claimed so many lives over the past decade. Catherine had seen enough body bags loaded onto transport planes to know that Afghanistan's beauty was as deadly as it was breathtaking. Viper, be advised, we're launching additional search assets. Blackhawk helicopters inbound to your position. Roger, I'll maintain high cover and continue sweep. Catherine's mind wandered to the last time she had seen Myra Kastner. It had been at the Officers' Club 6 months ago, during a rare moment when both pilots were on the same base. Myra had been surrounded by admirers, regaling them with stories of her latest air-to-air kills. Catherine had watched from across the room, nursing a beer and feeling invisible. Their eyes had met briefly, and Myra had smiled, not the practiced smile she gave to reporters, but something genuine and warm. Catherine's radar screen began painting new contacts, the incoming Blackhawks, their distinctive signatures appearing as they approached from the south. She adjusted her radio frequency to coordinate with the helicopter crews, knowing that their combined search would cover more ground than any single aircraft could manage alone. Blackhawk Alpha, this is Viper. I have you on radar, bearing 185, range 20 miles. Roger, Viper. Blackhawk Alpha acknowledging. We're carrying a full search team with medical support. What's your assessment of the target area? Catherine studied the terrain below, her experienced eye noting the steep ravines and hidden valleys that could easily swallow a downed aircraft. The mountains seemed to mock their efforts, their ancient stone faces revealing nothing of the drama playing out above them. Blackhawk Alpha, terrain is extremely difficult. Multiple valleys and ravines provide concealment. Weather is clear, but terrain masking could hide wreckage. Copy that, Viper. We'll start with the most accessible areas and work our way into the difficult terrain. Catherine banked again, her eyes constantly moving between her instruments and the landscape below. The A-10 was not built for search and rescue, it was built for destruction. But today, she hoped its keen sensors and long loiter time would serve a different purpose. Today, she prayed she would find her fellow pilot alive. The radio crackled with a new voice. All units, this is Kandahar Tower. Be advised, we have intercepted enemy communications suggesting hostile forces are also searching for the downed aircraft. Consider the area potentially compromised. Catherine felt her pulse quicken. This was no longer just a search and rescue, it was becoming a race. The Taliban knew that a downed American fighter would be a tremendous propaganda victory, not to mention the intelligence value of captured equipment. She pushed the A-10 harder, her engines responding with increased thrust as she descended toward the mountain peaks. Viper copies, proceeding with increased caution. Below, the mountains held their secrets close, and Catherine knew that somewhere in those stone corridors, Captain Myra, Silence, Kastner was either fighting for her life or had already paid the ultimate price for her service. The desert wind continued to blow, carrying with it the weight of unspoken prayers and the promise of either miracle or tragedy. Catherine's trained eyes caught a glint of metal on a distant ridge. Her heart hammered as she banked toward it, adjusting her heading to investigate. The sun was climbing higher, and the harsh light created both revealing shadows and deceptive mirages. She squinted through her visor, trying to determine if the metallic flash was aircraft debris or merely another trick of the unforgiving landscape. Tower, this is Viper. Possible contact on ridge line, coordinates 37.5 north, 69.8 east. Descending to investigate. Roger, Viper. Blackhawk Alpha, divert to Viper's coordinates for ground assessment. Catherine felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Every decision she made in the next few minutes could mean the difference between bringing a fellow pilot home or watching her disappear forever into the mountain's embrace. She had spent her career in the shadows of pilots like Myra Kastner, content to do the unglamorous work while others claimed the glory. But now, with silence truly silent, Catherine found herself thrust into the spotlight she had always avoided. The metallic glint resolved into twisted aluminum as she approached. Her heart sank as she recognized the distinctive shape of an F-16's wing, crumpled against the rocky slope like a broken bird. There was no sign of the cockpit section, which meant either it had been destroyed in the impact or had separated during the crash sequence. Tower, this is Viper. I have visual on aircraft debris, appears to be F-16 wing section. No sign of cockpit or pilot. Continuing search of immediate area. Roger, Viper. Blackhawk Alpha is 5 minutes out from your position. Catherine orbited the crash site, her eyes scanning for any sign of life or additional debris. The mountain slope was steep and rocky, covered with loose scree that would make any ground rescue extremely difficult. She noted the impact pattern, the way the metal had been twisted and scattered by the violence of the collision. Her pilot's mind automatically reconstructed the crash sequence, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. We have visual on your aircraft. Where do you want us to start the search? Catherine looked down at the helicopter crew, their aircraft hovering carefully above the crash site. The pilots were skilled, but the thin air and unpredictable mountain winds made their job incredibly dangerous. She had to coordinate their efforts efficiently to maximize their chances of finding Myra while minimizing their exposure to enemy fire. Blackhawk Alpha recommends starting search 200 meters north of the main debris field. The cockpit section likely separated during descent. Roger, Viper, deploying search team now. Catherine watched as the Blackhawk crew lowered their rescue personnel onto the mountain slope. The men moved with practiced efficiency, their movements sure despite the treacherous terrain. She maintained her orbit overhead, her eyes constantly scanning the surrounding area for any sign of enemy movement or additional aircraft debris. The radio crackled with a new transmission. All units, this is Kandahar Intelligence. We have confirmed enemy radio chatter about the crash site. Recommend expediting search operations. Catherine felt the familiar tension building in her chest. Time was running out, and the mountains were about to become a battleground. She increased her altitude slightly, giving herself a better view of the surrounding terrain while maintaining her ability to provide close air support if needed. Blackhawk Alpha, be advised. Intelligence indicates possible enemy forces in the area. Recommend accelerating search pattern. Roger, Viper. Our people are moving as fast as they can in this terrain. Catherine's hands found the weapon system's controls almost instinctively. The A-10's GAU-8 cannon was loaded and ready, its massive bulk reassuring beneath her feet. She had never fired it in anger, but she had trained countless hours for this moment. If the Taliban tried to interfere with the rescue operation, they would discover why the A-10 was feared throughout Afghanistan. Below, the search team continued their methodical examination of the crash site. Catherine could see them moving among the scattered debris, their movements becoming more urgent as the minutes passed. The mountain seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next act in this deadly drama to unfold. Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. We've found the cockpit section. It's approximately 400 meters northeast of the main debris field. Catherine's pulse quickened. The cockpit section would tell them everything they needed to know about Myra's fate. She banked toward the new coordinates, her eyes straining to see the wreckage through the thin mountain air. Roger, Blackhawk Alpha, what's the status of the cockpit? Still assessing, Viper. The canopy is intact but heavily damaged. Give us a few more minutes. Catherine felt time slowing down, each second stretching like elastic as she waited for news of her fellow pilot's fate. The desert wind continued to blow, carrying with it the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers and the promise that some secrets would soon be revealed. The radio fell silent except for the soft hiss of static, and Catherine found herself holding her breath as she orbited above the crash site. Below, the search team worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that every minute brought them closer to either salvation or disaster. The mountains watched impassively, their ancient stone faces revealing nothing of the human drama playing out in their shadow. Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. Cockpit is empty. Repeat, cockpit is empty. No sign of pilot or ejection seat. Catherine's heart leaped. An empty cockpit meant that Myra had successfully ejected before impact. She was alive, somewhere in these mountains, possibly injured but breathing. The search had suddenly become a race against time, enemy forces, and the unforgiving terrain. Blackhawk Alpha, expand search pattern immediately. If she ejected, she could be anywhere within a 5-kilometer radius. Roger, Viper, deploying additional search teams now. Catherine pushed her A-10 into a wider orbit, her experienced eyes scanning the mountainous terrain for any sign of a parachute or survival signal. The landscape was vast and hostile, offering countless hiding places for a downed pilot. Myra could be anywhere, hidden in a cave, injured on a ledge, or captured by Taliban forces who were also searching for her. All units, this is Kandahar Tower. Be advised, we're detecting increased enemy radio traffic in your sector. Recommend extreme caution. Catherine felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders. As the senior pilot on scene, she was responsible for coordinating the search while protecting the rescue teams from enemy interference. It was a role she had never wanted but now embraced with grim determination. Blackhawk Alpha, this is Viper. I'm going to expand my search pattern to the eastern slopes. Continue your ground search, but be prepared to extract immediately if I call it in. Roger, Viper. We'll keep our extraction routes clear. Catherine banked toward the eastern mountains, her radar screen painting a complex picture of the terrain ahead. The peaks rose to nearly 14,000 feet, their snow-covered summits gleaming in the morning sun. Somewhere in that maze of stone and ice, Captain Myra Silence Kastner was fighting for her life. The A-10's engines hummed steadily as Catherine began her systematic search of the eastern slopes. She knew that time was running out, but she also knew that rushing would only lead to mistakes. Myra had survived the crash. Now it was up to Catherine to bring her home. The radio crackled with a new transmission. Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. We've found parachute debris on the northern slope. Looks like a clean deployment. Catherine's spirits lifted slightly. A clean parachute deployment meant that Myra had ejected successfully and had at least made it to the ground alive. Now they just had to find her before the Taliban did. Blackhawk Alpha, I'm heading to your position. Mark the parachute site and expand your search from there. Roger, Viper, marking with smoke now. Catherine saw the purple smoke rising from the mountainside, a small beacon of hope in the vast wilderness. She adjusted her heading, bringing the A-10 around in a tight circle above the search area. Her eyes swept the terrain methodically, looking for any sign of movement or disturbance that might indicate Myra's location. The mountain silence was broken by the sound of rotor blades and jet engines, but Catherine knew that this mechanical symphony was nothing compared to the silence that had earned Myra her call sign. Soon, she hoped, that silence would be broken by the sound of a rescue helicopter lifting off with a fellow pilot safely aboard. Catherine's radar screen suddenly lit up with new contacts approaching from the north. Her blood chilled as she recognized the distinctive signature of enemy aircraft, old Soviet-era helicopters that the Taliban had somehow managed to get airborne. The race had just become a battle. Blackhawk Alpha, this is Viper. We have hostile aircraft inbound from the north. 3 contacts, bearing 010, range 15 miles. Extract your people immediately. Roger Viper, beginning extraction now. Catherine felt the familiar calm descending over her as she prepared for combat. This was what she had trained for, what the A-10 was built for. The aircraft seemed to sense her intent, its controls responding with crisp precision as she armed her weapons systems. Kandahar Tower, this is Viper. I have hostile aircraft inbound to the search area, requesting permission to engage. Viper, you are cleared to engage. Protect the rescue operation at all costs. Catherine's finger found the trigger as she lined up her first target. The GAU-8 cannon spun up to firing speed, its massive bulk vibrating through the aircraft's frame. She had never fired it in anger, but she was about to discover why the A-10 was known as the Warthog: ugly, tough, and absolutely deadly. Blackhawk Alpha, get your people out of there. I'm going hot. The first Taliban helicopter appeared over the ridge line, its rotor blades glinting in the sun. Catherine squeezed the trigger, and the GAU-8 cannon roared to life, sending a stream of 30 depleted uranium rounds toward the target. The enemy aircraft disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris, its wreckage tumbling down the mountainside. Splash 1, Catherine reported, already turning toward the second target. Blackhawk Alpha, what's your status? Viper, we're still extracting the search team. Need another 2 minutes. Catherine didn't have 2 minutes. The remaining Taliban helicopters were closing fast, their gunners already opening fire. She pushed the A-10 into a diving attack, her cannon spitting death as she engaged the second aircraft. The mountain air was filled with the sound of gunfire and the smell of cordite. Splash 2, she called out as the second helicopter erupted in flames. 1 remaining hostile. The third Taliban aircraft had learned from its companion's fate and was staying low, using the terrain to mask its approach. Catherine lost sight of it momentarily as it disappeared behind a ridge, but she knew it was still out there, hunting for the rescue team. Blackhawk Alpha, you need to move now. I've lost contact with the third hostile. Roger Viper, extraction complete. We're airborne and heading south. Catherine felt a moment of relief as she watched the rescue helicopter disappear over the southern ridge. But the relief was short-lived. The third Taliban aircraft had reappeared, and it was heading directly toward her position. She banked hard to the left, pulling the A-10 through a tight turn that stressed the aircraft's limits. The enemy gunner opened fire, his bullets stitching across the sky where Catherine's aircraft had been moments before. She rolled inverted and dove toward the valley floor, using the terrain to break the Taliban pilot's lock on her position. The A-10's titanium bathtub cockpit was designed to withstand ground fire, but she had no desire to test its limits. Kandahar Tower, this is Viper. I'm engaged with the third hostile. Blackhawk Alpha has successfully extracted. Roger Viper, additional support is en route. ETA 10 minutes. Catherine didn't have 10 minutes. The Taliban helicopter was more maneuverable than her A-10, and its pilot was proving to be skilled and aggressive. She needed to end this quickly before her fuel ran low or the enemy pilot got lucky. She pulled the A-10 up into a climbing turn, using the aircraft's superior high-altitude performance to gain an advantage. The Taliban helicopter followed, its rotor blades laboring in the thin mountain air. Catherine waited until the enemy aircraft was committed to the climb, then rolled into a dive that brought her down behind and above her target. The GAU-8 cannon roared one final time, its depleted uranium rounds tearing through the Taliban helicopter's rotor assembly. The aircraft spun out of control, its wreckage joining its companions on the mountain slopes below. Splash 3, Catherine reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Area is secure. Resuming search for Ghost Rider 7. Negative, Viper. Blackhawk Alpha reports no sign of the pilot in the immediate crash area. RTB for refuel and debrief. Catherine felt a stab of disappointment. They had fought off the Taliban attack, but they still hadn't found Myra. Somewhere in these mountains, her fellow pilot was still missing, still in danger. The silence that had given Myra her call sign now seemed to mock their efforts. Roger, Kandahar Tower, Viper RTB. As Catherine turned her A-10 toward home, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. The mountains had revealed some of their secrets but had kept the most important one hidden. Captain Myra, Silence Kastner, was still out there, and Catherine was determined to find her. The desert wind continued to blow, carrying with it the smoke from burning helicopters and the promise that some silences were meant to be broken. Catherine had tasted combat for the first time, and she had proven that the janitor could fight as well as any pilot in the Air Force. But the greatest test was still ahead. Catherine's A-10 touched down on the Kandahar runway with a satisfying thump, the aircraft's sturdy landing gear absorbing the impact with characteristic resilience. As she taxied toward the hangar, she could see the ground crew already preparing for a rapid turnaround. The search for Myra wasn't over, it was just beginning. "Viper, good shooting out there," came the voice of her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Martinez, as Catherine shut down the engines. "3 kills on your first combat mission. That's got to be some kind of record." Catherine removed her helmet, her hair matted with sweat despite the cockpit's air conditioning. She didn't feel like celebrating. 3 enemy helicopters destroyed meant nothing if Myra was still missing. The Taliban would send more aircraft, more ground forces, and time was running out. "Just doing my job, Martinez. How long for refuel and rearm?" 30 minutes, ma'am. The colonel wants to see you in the briefing room as soon as you're ready." Catherine nodded, grabbing her flight bag and heading toward the operations building. The base was buzzing with activity. Additional search aircraft were being prepared. Intelligence officers were analyzing enemy radio intercepts, and medical personnel were standing by in case the search teams found survivors. Colonel James "Hawk" Morrison was waiting for her in the briefing room, his weathered face showing the strain of the morning's events. He was a veteran pilot himself, having flown F-16s during the Gulf War, and Catherine could see the worry in his eyes. "Outstanding work out there, Viper. You saved the rescue team and showed those Taliban bastards that we don't abandon our people." Catherine sat down heavily in the briefing room chair, her body still vibrating from the adrenaline of combat. "Thank you, sir, but we still haven't found Silence. She's out there somewhere and the Taliban knows it." "I know, and that's why we're launching a full-scale search and rescue operation. Every available aircraft, every available man. We're going to find her." Catherine studied the map spread across the briefing table, its surface covered with red marks indicating the crash site, parachute debris, and enemy positions. The search area was vast, covering hundreds of square kilometers of some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. "Sir, what about the classified payload she was carrying? Intelligence seemed very concerned about it." Colonel Morrison's expression darkened. "That's need to know, Captain, but I can tell you that we cannot allow that technology to fall into enemy hands. The search is now a dual mission: rescue the pilot and recover the payload." Catherine felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. She had proven herself in combat, but now she was being asked to lead a search operation that could determine the outcome of the war in Afghanistan. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Sir, I request permission to lead the next search sortie. I know the terrain, and I have the most recent intelligence on enemy positions." "Granted, but you won't be going alone. We're sending a full strike package: 2 A-10s, 4 F-16s, and 3 Blackhawk helicopters. You'll be the mission commander." Catherine's eyes widened. Mission commander. She had never led such a large operation before, and the responsibility was staggering. But she also knew that she was the best qualified pilot for the job. She had proven herself in combat, and she knew the terrain better than anyone. "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't. Brief your pilots in 20 minutes. Takeoff is in 1 hour." As Catherine left the briefing room, she felt the eyes of the entire base upon her. Word of her combat success had spread quickly, and the janitor was suddenly being treated with a respect she had never experienced before. But she knew that respect was fragile. It could disappear as quickly as it had come if she failed to bring Myra home. The briefing room was packed with pilots and aircrew, their faces showing a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Catherine stood at the front of the room, the weight of command settling on her shoulders as she prepared to address the assembled aviators. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going back into those mountains to find Captain Kastner and bring her home. The Taliban knows she's out there, and they're going to try to stop us. But we're not going to let that happen." Catherine clicked to the first slide of her presentation, showing the search area and known enemy positions. The pilots leaned forward, their attention focused on every detail. The search area covers approximately 500 square kilometers of mountainous terrain. We know that Captain Kastner successfully ejected from her aircraft, and we found parachute debris indicating a safe landing. She's alive, and she's waiting for us to find her. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Catherine could feel the tension building as the pilots absorbed the magnitude of their mission. The enemy knows we're coming. They've already sent 3 helicopters to interfere with our search operations, and we can expect more resistance. But we have one advantage: we know how to fight, and we know how to win. Catherine clicked to the next slide, showing the tactical formation they would use during the search. The pilots studied the diagram intently, memorizing their positions and responsibilities. "We'll be flying in a standard combat spread, with the A-10s providing close air support and the F-16s maintaining air superiority. The Blackhawks will conduct the actual search operations, with ground teams ready to extract Captain Kastner as soon as we find her." A hand shot up from the back of the room. "Ma'am, what about the classified payload? Are we supposed to recover that as well?" Catherine hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest with her pilots. They deserved to know what they were risking their lives for. "The payload is secondary to the pilot. Our primary mission is to bring Captain Kastner home safely. But yes, we need to recover the classified equipment if possible. It cannot be allowed to fall into enemy hands." The briefing continued for another 15 minutes, with Catherine answering questions and refining the tactical plan. When it was over, the pilots filed out of the room with grim determination etched on their faces. They knew the risks, but they also knew that one of their own was counting on them. Catherine remained behind, studying the map one final time. Somewhere in those mountains, Myra was fighting for her life. The silence that had given her the call sign was now her only protection against the Taliban forces that were hunting her. But Catherine was determined to break that silence with the sound of rescue helicopters and the promise of salvation. The desert wind continued to blow outside, carrying with it the dust of ancient battles and the hope of modern heroes. Catherine knew that the next few hours would determine whether the legend of silence would end in tragedy or triumph. She was determined to ensure it was the latter. As she walked toward her aircraft, Catherine could hear the sound of engines starting up across the flight line. The massive search and rescue operation was beginning, and she was its leader. The responsibility was overwhelming, but she had learned something important during her first combat mission. She was not just a janitor anymore. She was a warrior, and warriors never left their comrades behind. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat ready on the tarmac, its weapons loaded and fuel tanks topped off. Catherine approached the aircraft with a mixture of confidence and trepidation. This would be her second combat mission, but the first where she was responsible for the lives of so many others. The weight of command was heavy, but she was determined to carry it with honor. "Ma'am, aircraft is ready for launch," Staff Sergeant Martinez reported, his voice filled with pride. "Full load of 30 ammunition, and we've added extra flares for countermeasures. Those Taliban bastards won't know what hit them." Catherine nodded, pulling on her flight gloves as she performed her pre-flight inspection. The A-10's battle damage from the morning's engagement had been quickly repaired, and the aircraft looked as formidable as ever. Its titanium bathtub cockpit gleamed in the afternoon sun, a testament to the aircraft's legendary durability. "Good work, Martinez. Let's bring our girl home." The tower cleared the strike package for takeoff, and Catherine felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as her A-10 lifted off from the runway. Behind her, the other aircraft followed in perfect formation, a symphony of American air power that would make the Taliban think twice about interfering with the rescue operation. "Viper, this is Hawk Flight. We're formed up and ready to proceed." Catherine keyed her radio, addressing the F-16 pilots who would provide air cover for the operation. "Roger, Hawk Flight. Maintain high cover and watch for enemy aircraft. We're not going to be surprised this time." The formation climbed toward the mountains, their aircraft silhouetted against the bright blue sky. Catherine felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of during those long nights at flight school. She was leading a combat mission to save a fellow pilot, and she was determined to succeed. "Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. We're 20 minutes out from the search area. What's your assessment of the threat level?" Catherine scanned her radar screen, noting the clear skies ahead. But she knew that the Taliban were skilled at hiding their aircraft in the mountain valleys, using the terrain to mask their approach until it was too late. "Blackhawk Alpha, threat level is high. Enemy has already demonstrated willingness to interfere with search operations. Maintain heightened alert and be prepared to extract immediately on my command." "Roger, Viper, we'll keep our eyes open." The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks shrouded in clouds that looked deceptively peaceful. Catherine knew that appearances could be deceiving in Afghanistan. The most beautiful landscapes often concealed the greatest dangers. But she also knew that somewhere in those mountains, Myra was waiting for rescue, and that was all that mattered. "All units, this is Viper. We're approaching the search area. Spread out and begin systematic coverage. Remember, we're looking for a single pilot in 500 square kilometers of hostile terrain. She's counting on us to find her." The formation spread out as they reached the mountains, each aircraft taking its assigned sector. Catherine felt the familiar thrill of the hunt as she began her search pattern, her experienced eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of life. The A-10's sensors were optimized for ground attack, not search and rescue, but she was determined to make them work. "Viper, this is Hawk 2. I've got movement in Sector 7. Could be our pilot." Catherine's heart leaped as she banked toward the coordinates. Every sighting brought hope, but also the possibility of disappointment. The mountains were full of wildlife, herders, and Taliban fighters, any of which could be mistaken for a downed pilot from high altitude. "Hawk 2, maintain overwatch. I'm descending to investigate." Catherine pushed the A-10 into a shallow dive, her eyes straining to see through the thin mountain air. The movement resolved into a small group of goats, their herder nowhere to be seen. She felt a stab of disappointment but continued her search. Myra was out there somewhere, and Catherine was going to find her. "Negative contact, Hawk 2. Continue search pattern." The radio crackled with reports from the other aircraft as they methodically covered their assigned sectors. Each negative report brought a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that they hadn't found a body, frustration that they hadn't found their missing pilot. Time was running out, and the Taliban were undoubtedly closing in. "Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. We're detecting enemy radio traffic in the area. Sounds like they're coordinating a ground search." Catherine felt her pulse quicken. The Taliban were conducting their own search operation, and they had the advantage of local knowledge and unlimited manpower. But the Americans had superior technology and training. It was going to be a race to see who found Myra first. "All units be advised. Enemy forces are actively searching for our pilot. Maintain heightened alert and be prepared to engage on my command." The search continued for another hour, with each aircraft covering its assigned sector multiple times. Catherine felt the frustration building as the negative reports continued to come in. Myra was out there somewhere, but the mountains were vast and unforgiving. Every shadow could hide a body, every cave could conceal a survivor. "Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. We're picking up a faint emergency beacon signal. Bearing 320, approximately 8 kilometers from the main crash site." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. Emergency beacon meant survival gear, and survival gear meant Myra was alive and thinking clearly enough to activate her equipment. She banked toward the coordinates, her A-10 cutting through the thin air with renewed purpose. "Blackhawk Alpha, I'm heading to your position. All units converge on bearing 320 from the main crash site." The terrain in the new search area was even more treacherous than before, steep ravines carved by centuries of erosion, with narrow ledges that could easily hide a downed pilot. Catherine descended carefully, her eyes scanning every shadow and crevice. The emergency beacon signal was getting stronger, but she still couldn't see anything that looked like a crash site or parachute. "Viper, this is Hawk 3. I've got visual on what looks like fabric caught on a rock outcropping, 2 clicks north of your position." Catherine's pulse quickened as she adjusted her heading. Fabric on rocks could mean parachute material, and parachute material meant they were getting close. She pushed the A-10 toward the coordinates, her weapons systems armed and ready in case they encountered enemy resistance. "Hawk 3, maintain overwatch. I'm going in for a closer look." The fabric resolved into torn parachute material as Catherine approached, the olive-drab nylon fluttering in the mountain wind like a distress flag. But there was no sign of the pilot who had worn it. The parachute looked like it had been deliberately cut away, which suggested that Myra had landed safely and was mobile. "Blackhawk Alpha, I've got visual on parachute material. Pilot is not in the immediate area but appears to have landed safely. Expand search pattern around these coordinates." "Roger, Viper, deploying ground teams now." Catherine orbited the area while the Blackhawk crew rappelled down to the parachute site. The emergency beacon signal was definitely coming from this area, but the terrain was so broken that Myra could be hiding anywhere within a kilometer radius. The Taliban radio chatter was also increasing, which meant enemy forces were getting closer. "Viper, this is Ground Team Alpha. We've found the parachute and survival gear. The pilot definitely survived the landing, but there are signs of blood on the rocks. She may be injured." Catherine felt a mixture of hope and concern. Blood meant injury, but it also meant that Myra was alive and had been here recently. The question was whether she had moved voluntarily or been captured by Taliban forces. "Ground Team Alpha, any sign of which direction she went?" "Negative, Viper. The terrain is too rocky to show tracks, but we found this." Catherine watched through her binoculars as the ground team held up a piece of fabric that looked like it had been torn from a flight suit. The fabric was tied to a rock in a specific pattern that she recognized from survival training, a signal that meant safe but moving. "Ground Team Alpha, that's a survival signal. She's alive and mobile. Continue search in expanding circles from that position." The radio crackled with a new transmission. "All units, this is Kandahar intelligence. We're intercepting increased Taliban radio traffic. They're moving ground forces toward your position. Estimate 30 minutes before they arrive in strength." Catherine felt the familiar calm of combat descending over her. 30 minutes to find Myra and get her out before the Taliban arrived in force. It was going to be close, but she had faith in her team and in Myra's survival skills. All units, we have 30 minutes before hostile forces arrive. Accelerate search pattern and prepare for immediate extraction once we locate the pilot. Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. We're picking up the emergency beacon signal from a cave system approximately 500 meters east of the parachute site. Moving to investigate. Catherine banked toward the cave system, her heart pounding with anticipation. Cave systems provided excellent concealment for a downed pilot, but they also created tactical challenges for rescue operations. If Myra was in the caves, it would be difficult to extract her quickly if the Taliban arrived. Blackhawk Alpha, proceed with caution. Cave systems can be defended easily, and we don't know if the pilot is alone. Roger Viper, Ground Team Alpha is moving to the cave entrance now. Catherine watched anxiously as the ground team approached the cave system. The emergency beacon signal was definitely coming from inside the caves, but she couldn't see any movement or signs of life. The mountains seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the next act in this deadly drama. Viper, this is Ground Team Alpha. We've reached the cave entrance. The beacon signal is definitely coming from inside, but we can't see anyone. We're going in. Catherine felt her stomach tighten. Cave fighting was among the most dangerous forms of combat, and she was sending her people into an unknown situation with enemy forces approaching. But they had no choice. If Myra was in those caves, they had to get her out. Ground Team Alpha, proceed with extreme caution. Unknown number of personnel inside, unknown threat level. The radio fell silent as the ground team entered the cave system. Catherine could only orbit overhead and wait, her weapons systems armed and ready but useless against an enemy she couldn't see. The silence stretched on, broken only by the steady hum of her engines and the whisper of wind over the mountains. Viper, this is Ground Team Alpha. We've found her. Captain Kastner is alive but injured. She's been hiding in the cave since yesterday. We need immediate medical extraction. Catherine felt a wave of relief wash over her. Myra was alive. After more than 24 hours in the mountains, surrounded by enemy forces, she had survived. The legend of silence was about to be renewed. Ground Team Alpha, what's her condition? Conscious and alert, but she's got a compound fracture of the left leg and possible internal injuries. She's been using her survival gear to stay warm and signal for rescue. Tough as nails, this one. Catherine smiled despite the tension. That was Myra, tough, resourceful, and too stubborn to die in some godforsaken cave. But they still had to get her out, and the Taliban were getting closer with every passing minute. Blackhawk Alpha, prepare for immediate medical extraction. We need to get her out of here before the cavalry arrives. Roger Viper, we're lowering a basket stretcher now. ETA for extraction is 10 minutes. Catherine checked her fuel gauge and weapons status. She had enough fuel for another hour of flying, and her ammunition was fully loaded. If the Taliban wanted to interfere with the extraction, they would have to go through her first. All units, maintain defensive positions around the extraction site. We're not leaving without our pilot. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Catherine orbited the cave system, her eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain for any sign of enemy movement. The other aircraft maintained their assigned positions, creating a protective umbrella around the rescue operation. Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. We have the pilot aboard. She's conscious and asking for you specifically. We're ready for extraction. Catherine felt a surge of emotion. Myra was asking for her. The pilot she had looked up to for so long wanted to speak with the janitor who had led the rescue mission. It was a moment of validation that Catherine had never expected. Blackhawk Alpha, tell Captain Kastner that Viper says welcome back. Now get her out of here. Roger Viper, extraction in progress. Catherine watched as the Blackhawk lifted off from the mountainside, its precious cargo finally safe. But the mission wasn't over yet. They still had to get through the Taliban forces that were converging on their position. The radio crackled with reports of enemy movement, and Catherine knew that the real battle was just beginning. All units, this is Viper. Package is secure. Form up for extraction. We're going home. The formation began to reassemble, but Catherine's radar screen was painting new contacts approaching from multiple directions. The Taliban had finally arrived in force, and they were not going to let the Americans escape without a fight. Viper, this is Hawk leader. I count 6 hostile aircraft approaching from the north. They're trying to cut off our escape route. Catherine felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as she prepared for combat. The rescue was complete, but now they had to fight their way out. She had proven herself once already today. Now it was time to do it again. Hawk leader, take the northern contacts. I'll handle anything that gets through. Blackhawk Alpha, stay low and use terrain masking. We'll clear the path for you. The sky above the mountains erupted in violence as the two forces collided. Catherine found herself engaged with 2 Taliban helicopters simultaneously, her A-10's cannon spitting fire as she maneuvered through the mountain peaks. The enemy pilots were skilled and aggressive, but they were no match for American training and technology. Splash 4 and 5, Catherine reported as 2 more Taliban aircraft fell to her guns. Blackhawk Alpha, you're clear to proceed south. Roger Viper, thanks for the cover. The battle continued for another 20 minutes, with the American aircraft slowly fighting their way clear of the mountains. Catherine's A-10 had taken several hits, but the aircraft's legendary durability kept her flying. By the time they reached friendly airspace, she had accounted for 5 enemy aircraft destroyed. Kandahar Tower, this is Viper. Package delivered. Mission accomplished. Roger Viper, outstanding work. Medical is standing by for the wounded pilot. As Catherine's formation approached Kandahar Air Base, she could see the ambulances and medical personnel waiting on the tarmac. The base was buzzing with activity, and she knew that word of the successful rescue had already spread throughout the facility. Viper, this is Blackhawk Alpha. Captain Kastner wants to speak with you on the radio. Catherine felt her heart skip a beat. After all these years of admiring Myra from a distance, she was finally going to have a real conversation with her idol. She keyed her radio, not knowing what to expect. Silence, this is Viper. How are you feeling? Viper, this is Silence. I'm feeling grateful to be alive, thanks to you. I heard about your performance today. 5 kills and a successful rescue mission. That's the kind of flying that legends are made of. Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes. To be praised by Myra Kastner, the pilot she had looked up to for so long, was more meaningful than any medal or commendation. She had finally proven herself worthy of respect. Just doing my job, Silence. I'm glad we got you out of there in one piece. Viper, I've been thinking about something while I was hiding in those caves. The Air Force needs more pilots like you, pilots who understand that the mission comes first, no matter what. When I get out of the hospital, I want to recommend you for promotion to Major. You've earned it. Catherine couldn't speak for a moment. Promotion to Major would mean new responsibilities, new challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference. But more importantly, it would mean that she was finally being recognized for her abilities rather than dismissed as just another support pilot. Thank you, Silence. That means more to me than you know. Viper, the pleasure is all mine. You saved my life today, and I won't forget it. As the formation touched down at Kandahar Air Base, Catherine felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. She had proven herself in combat, led a successful rescue mission, and earned the respect of her peers. The janitor had become a warrior, and the warrior had become a leader. The medical team rushed to extract Myra from the Blackhawk, but Catherine could see her fellow pilot giving her a thumbs up before disappearing into the ambulance. It was a gesture of respect from one warrior to another, and Catherine felt honored to receive it. Colonel Morrison was waiting for her as she climbed out of her A-10, his face beaming with pride. The base commander rarely came to the flight line personally, but today was different. Today, Catherine had proven that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Outstanding work, Captain. 7 kills in one day, a successful rescue mission, and 0 friendly casualties. That's the kind of performance that makes careers. Catherine removed her helmet, her hair matted with sweat and her face streaked with exhaustion. But her eyes were bright with accomplishment and satisfaction. She had found her calling, and her calling had found her. Thank you, sir, but I couldn't have done it without my team. Everyone performed magnificently. True, but leadership makes the difference. You held that formation together under extreme pressure, and you brought everyone home safely. That's what we call command presence. As Catherine walked toward the operations building, she could feel the eyes of the entire base upon her. But this time, the attention didn't make her uncomfortable. She had earned her place among the warriors, and she was ready to embrace the responsibilities that came with it. The desert wind continued to blow across the base, carrying with it the dust of distant battles and the promise of new challenges. Catherine knew that her war was far from over, but she also knew that she was no longer the same pilot who had taken off that morning. She had been transformed by combat, tested by fire, and forged into something stronger. The legend of Silence Kastner would continue, but now there was a new legend beginning. The legend of Viper Thorn, the pilot who had learned that true strength comes not from seeking glory, but from doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. The medical team worked frantically to stabilize Myra's injuries, but Catherine could see in her fellow pilot's eyes that she was going to be fine. The mountains had tested her and found her worthy, just as they had tested Catherine and found her ready for leadership. As the sun set over the Afghan mountains, Catherine stood on the flight line and watched her A-10 being prepared for its next mission. The aircraft bore the scars of combat, but it was ready to fight again. Like its pilot, it had been tested and proven worthy. The radio crackled with a transmission from the medical facility. "Viper, this is medical. Captain Kastner is stable and asking for you. She'd like to speak with you in person." Catherine smiled as she headed toward the hospital. The silence that had defined Myra's career was about to be broken by a conversation between warriors, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. The war in Afghanistan would continue, but today had proven that American pilots were ready for any challenge. The mountains had demanded sacrifice, and warriors like Catherine Thorne and Myra Kastner had answered the call. Catherine found Myra in the hospital bed, her leg in a cast but her spirit unbroken. The legendary pilot looked smaller than Catherine had expected, but her eyes still held the fire that had made her famous throughout the Air Force. "Viper, I wanted to thank you in person. What you did today, leading that rescue mission, fighting off those Taliban aircraft, that's the kind of flying that saves lives and wins wars." Catherine pulled up a chair beside the bed, still hardly believing that she was having this conversation with her idol. "I learned from the best, Silence. Your reputation preceded you, and it gave me something to live up to." "My reputation," Myra laughed softly. "Let me tell you something about reputations. They're only as good as the people who carry them forward. Today, you carried the torch better than I ever could have." Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes again. To hear such praise from the pilot she had admired for so long was overwhelming, but she also knew that she had earned it through her actions, not her words. "I've been thinking about what you said on the radio, about recommending me for promotion. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. Viper, you led a complex rescue mission under enemy fire and brought everyone home safely. If that doesn't qualify you for promotion, I don't know what does. The Air Force needs leaders, not just pilots." Catherine nodded, understanding for the first time what Myra meant. Leadership wasn't about rank or glory. It was about making the hard decisions and taking responsibility for the consequences. She had done that today, and she was ready to do it again. "I won't let you down, Silence." "I know you won't." And Catherine, Myra used her first name for the first time, making the moment even more personal. "The next time someone calls you the janitor, you tell them that janitors are the ones who clean up the messes that other people make. Today, you cleaned up a mess that nobody else could handle." Catherine smiled, finally understanding that her nickname had been a badge of honor all along. She had been the one who handled the difficult missions, the unglamorous work that kept the war machine running. And today, she had proven that she could handle the most important mission of all, bringing a fellow warrior home. As she left the hospital, Catherine looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, other pilots were flying other missions, facing other challenges. But she knew that they were all part of the same team, all working toward the same goal, protecting the freedoms that made their service meaningful. The desert wind continued to blow, carrying with it the sounds of aircraft engines and the voices of warriors preparing for the next battle. Catherine walked toward her quarters, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, she was content to be exactly what she had always been, a pilot who did her job with skill and dedication, regardless of whether anyone noticed. The only difference was that now people were starting to notice, and that made all the difference in the world. The legend of Catherine Viper Thorne was just beginning, but it was already built on a foundation of courage, competence, and an unshakable commitment to bringing her fellow warriors home. The mountains had tested her and found her worthy, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the distance, she could hear the sound of aircraft engines starting up, preparing for night missions over the hostile terrain. The war continued, but now it continued with one more proven leader, one more warrior who understood that true strength comes not from seeking glory, but from doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Catherine Viper Thorne had found her calling, and her calling had found her. The silence had been broken, and in its place was the steady sound of progress, of warriors supporting warriors, of legends being born in the crucible of combat. The desert wind carried her prayers and her promises toward the mountains, where other battles would be fought and other heroes would be tested. But tonight, the silence had been broken, and the sound of victory echoed across the base like a promise of better days to come. 6 months later, Major Catherine Viper Thorne stood in the briefing room at Kandahar Air Base, addressing a group of newly arrived pilots. The silver oak leaves on her collar caught the light as she moved, a symbol of the leadership she had earned through combat and proven through action. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Afghanistan. This is not the war you trained for, and it's not the war you expected, but it's the war we have, and it's the war we're going to win." The young pilots looked at her with a mixture of awe and nervousness. They had heard the stories about the janitor who had become a legend, the pilot who had led the rescue mission that saved Captain Silence Kastner. But seeing her in person, they realized that legends were made of the same flesh and blood as everyone else. "You're going to hear a lot of stories while you're here, stories about heroes and villains, about victories and defeats. But I want you to remember one thing: heroes aren't born, they're made. They're made by the choices you make when nobody's watching, by the standards you maintain when it would be easier to let them slip." Catherine clicked to the first slide of her presentation, showing the mountainous terrain that would be their battleground. The peaks looked deceptively peaceful in the satellite imagery, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving. "This terrain will test you in ways you never imagined. It will demand everything you have to give, and then it will demand more. But if you remember your training, trust your instincts, and never leave a warrior behind, you'll make it through." A young lieutenant raised his hand. "Ma'am, What's the most important thing to remember when flying combat missions? Catherine smiled, remembering when she had asked similar questions as a young pilot. The most important thing is that you're not flying alone. You're part of a team, and that team is depending on you to do your job. It doesn't matter if you're flying close air support or air-to-air combat. Your fellow warriors are counting on you. The briefing continued for another hour, with Catherine sharing the lessons she had learned through combat and command. When it was over, the young pilots filed out with a better understanding of what they were facing and what was expected of them. Colonel Morrison approached her as the briefing room emptied. "Outstanding as always, Major. How are the new pilots shaping up?" "They're good, sir. Raw but good. Give them a few months and they'll be ready for anything." "I hope so. Intelligence reports suggest that the Taliban are planning something big. We're going to need every pilot we can get." Catherine nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with her new rank. She was no longer just responsible for her own aircraft and mission. She was responsible for developing the next generation of combat pilots. "Sir, I'd like to request permission to fly with the new pilots on their first combat missions. They need to see how it's done." "Granted, but remember you're a major now. Your job is to lead, not to be the tip of the spear." Catherine understood what the colonel meant, but she also knew that leadership meant different things in different situations. Sometimes it meant staying in the rear and coordinating operations. Sometimes it meant leading from the front and showing others how to fight. "I understand, sir, but they need to know that their leaders are willing to share the risks." Colonel Morrison smiled. "That's what makes you a good leader, Major. You understand that respect is earned, not given." As Catherine walked across the base toward the flight line, she could see her A-10 being prepared for the evening mission. The aircraft had been repaired and upgraded since her legendary rescue mission, but it still bore the scars of combat. Like its pilot, it had been tested and proven worthy. Staff Sergeant Martinez approached with her flight helmet and gear. "Evening, Major. Aircraft is ready for launch. Full load of ammunition and extra fuel tanks for extended patrol." "Thanks, Martinez. Any word from the hospital about Captain Kastner?" "Yes, ma'am. She's being transferred to Germany for final treatment. Should be back on flying status within 6 months." Catherine felt a surge of satisfaction. Myra's recovery was progressing well, and soon she would be back in the cockpit where she belonged. The legend of Silence would continue, but now it would be joined by other legends, pilots who had proven themselves worthy of the name Warrior. "Major Thorne, you have a visitor." Catherine turned to see Captain Myra Kastner approaching on crutches, her legs still in a cast, but her spirit clearly unbroken. The legendary pilot looked stronger than she had in the hospital, and her eyes held the same fire that had made her famous. "Silence, I thought you were supposed to be in Germany." "I am tomorrow, but I wanted to see you before I left. I heard about your promotion and your new assignment. Training the next generation of combat pilots, that's important work." Catherine felt honored that Myra had taken the time to visit her before leaving for medical treatment. The relationship between the two pilots had evolved from admiration to mutual respect, and Catherine valued Myra's opinion more than anyone else's. "I'm trying to teach them what you taught me, that being a warrior isn't about seeking glory, it's about doing what needs to be done." "You're going to make a great instructor, Catherine. You have something that can't be taught, the ability to inspire others to be better than they think they are." Catherine helped Myra to a chair near the flight line, where they could watch the evening launch operations. The base was buzzing with activity as aircraft prepared for night missions, and Catherine felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. "I've been thinking about what happened in those mountains," Myra said quietly. "About the mission that brought us together. I realized something while I was hiding in those caves." Catherine leaned forward, interested in hearing Myra's perspective on the events that had changed both their lives. I realized that the silence I was known for wasn't really silence at all. It was listening to what others needed, listening to what the mission required, listening to what my conscience told me was right. Catherine nodded, understanding what Myra meant. True leadership wasn't about making noise or seeking attention. It was about understanding what was needed and providing it, regardless of personal cost. And you, Catherine, you listened better than anyone. You heard what I needed before I even knew I needed it. That's the mark of a true leader. Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes. To hear such praise from the pilot she had looked up to for so long was overwhelming, but she also knew that she had earned it through her actions. I learned from the best, Silence. Your example showed me what it meant to be a warrior. No, Catherine, you already were a warrior. You just needed the right mission to prove it. As the sun set over the Afghan mountains, the two pilots sat in comfortable silence, watching the aircraft prepare for their night missions. They had been tested by combat and proven worthy, and now they were ready to pass their knowledge on to the next generation. I have something for you, Myra said, reaching into her flight bag. She pulled out a small patch, the same silence patch that had adorned her flight suit for years. I want you to have this. Catherine stared at the patch, hardly believing what she was seeing. The silence patch was legendary throughout the Air Force, and to receive it was an honor beyond measure. Myra, I can't accept this. It's yours, you earned it. No, Catherine. I earned the right to pass it on, and I can't think of anyone more deserving than the pilot who saved my life and showed me what true leadership looks like. Catherine took the patch with trembling hands, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with it. She understood that she wasn't just receiving a piece of cloth, she was receiving a legacy, a tradition that she would be expected to uphold and pass on. Thank you, Myra, I won't let you down. I know you won't. And Catherine, the next time someone calls you the janitor, you tell them that janitors are the ones who keep things working when everyone else has given up. That's exactly what we need more of. As Myra left for her flight to Germany, Catherine stood on the flight line holding the silence patch and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as an underestimated support pilot, dismissed by her peers as competent but unremarkable. But combat had revealed her true nature, and leadership had given her the opportunity to make a difference. The desert wind continued to blow across the base, carrying with it the sounds of aircraft engines and the voices of warriors preparing for battle. Catherine looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, knowing that other pilots were flying other missions, facing other challenges. But she also knew that they were all part of the same team, all working toward the same goal, protecting the freedoms that made their service meaningful. And now, she was responsible for ensuring that the next generation of pilots understood that responsibility and embraced it. Major Catherine Viper Thorne had found her calling, and her calling had found her. The silence had been broken, and in its place was the steady sound of progress, of warriors supporting warriors, of legends being born in the crucible of combat. The legend of silence would continue, but now it would be carried forward by a new generation of pilots who understood that true strength comes not from seeking glory, but from doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. As Catherine walked toward her quarters, she could hear the sound of aircraft engines starting up, preparing for night missions over the hostile terrain. The war continued, but now it continued with proven leaders, with warriors who understood that the greatest victories are often won in silence, by pilots who do their jobs with skill and dedication, regardless of whether anyone notices. The desert wind carried her prayers and her promises toward the mountains, where other battles would be fought and other heroes would be tested. But tonight, the silence had been broken, and the sound of victory echoed across the base like a promise of better days to come. In the years that followed, Major Catherine Viper Thorne would train hundreds of pilots, many of whom would go on to become legends themselves. but she would always remember the lesson she had learned in the mountains of Afghanistan, that true leadership is not about seeking glory, but about bringing warriors home. The legend of silence lived on, carried forward by those who understood that the greatest victories are often won by those who speak softly but carry the biggest stick. And in the end, that was exactly what the Air Force needed: warriors who understood that duty, honor, and courage were not just words, but principles worth living and dying for. The desert wind would continue to blow, carrying with it the dust of distant battles and the promise of new challenges. But it would also carry the legacy of pilots like Catherine, Viper, Thorne, and Myra, Silence, Kastner, warriors who had proven that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that the greatest heroes are often the ones who never seek recognition for their deeds. Years later, when young pilots asked about the legend of silence, they would be told about two pilots who had proven that true strength comes not from seeking glory, but from doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. And they would understand that the greatest victories are often won by those who fight in silence, bringing their fellow warriors home against all odds. The mountains of Afghanistan would continue to test those who dared to fly over them, but they would also continue to forge legends, pilots who understood that the sky belongs to those who are willing to fight for it, and that the greatest honor is not in the medals on your chest, but in the lives you save and the warriors you bring home. The legend of silence had been passed on, and with it, the understanding that true warriors never fight alone. They fight as part of a team, supported by those who came before and responsible for those who will come after. And in the end, that is what makes them legends, not their individual achievements, but their contribution to something greater than themselves. The desert wind continued to blow, carrying with it the voices of warriors past and present, all united in the understanding that freedom is not free, and that those who defend it must be willing to pay the price in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But they also understood that the price is worth paying, because the alternative is a world where silence is not a choice, but a requirement. And so the legend continued, carried forward by each new generation of pilots who understood that the sky is not just a place to fly, but a place to serve, to sacrifice, and to prove that some things are worth fighting for. The silence had been broken, and in its place was the steady sound of progress, of warriors supporting warriors, of legends being born in the crucible of combat. The story of Catherine, Viper, Thorne, and Myra, Silence, Kastner would be told for generations, not because of their individual achievements, but because of what they represented: the understanding that true strength comes not from seeking glory, but from doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. And in the end, that is what makes heroes, not their willingness to fight, but their willingness to fight for something greater than themselves. The desert wind would continue to blow, carrying with it the legacy of warriors who understood that the greatest victories are often won in silence, by those who do their jobs with skill and dedication regardless of whether anyone notices. And in that silence, new legends would be born, new heroes would be forged, and the cycle would continue, forever and always, as long as there are those willing to defend the sky and the freedoms it represents.